Welcome all to part 9 in this series. Tomorrow's part may be delayed. By how much I cannot say. Thank you all for your patience on this journey. Please enjoy. She could see the stars. The blinding lights only visible on a cloudless night. She traveled to one and held it in her hand. A beautiful crystalline incandescent light. It shifted and twisted like a candle's flame in all directions at once. She watched it twinkle for a moment before releasing it. She flew to another and held it, too, examining it. It felt larger and softer, but like the other, she did not recognize it. Releasing it, the searched for one that could show her spirit the way home. None of them looked the same, not from here. She could identify no constellations at all. Not the two suns, not the huntress, not insect and pauper. The land looked different from the mountaintop when one only ever stood in the valley. So it was when one looked at the stars while amongst them. She found one that felt familiar, one that just might be able to help lead her soul home to rest. Reaching out to touch it, Hey, Arines, don't you fall asleep on me. Wah? She squeaked when she saw the man kneeling above her and tried to scoot away, only to be reminded that she was still backed into a corner. She needn't have worried, it seemed. The large man looked concerned, apologetic even. His crumpled little nose and blood-stained lips made him seem even more sincere. Son of the Almighty Arines, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to kill me. If it's any consolation, I probably would have just choked you out. She rubbed her head and moaned. You did choke me out. Yeah. Again, sorry about that. It's all right, she whispered with half-hearted smile. She offered him her hand, only to see him flinch. I won't hurt you again. You know my name. Tell me, what should I call a young gentleman such as yourself? Lieutenant Colonel Stephen McLaren, he said softly, placing his hand in hers. I'm not that young. She thought she had known at least part of his name from when the vile warden had spoken, but apparently she was wrong. It seemed he wasn't called human after all. Of course, she wasn't called night beast either. She gently brought his hand to her lips and licked the back. She may have held onto it just a moment longer than courtesy allowed. Okay. Thank you, Stephen said, withdrawing his hand. Nice to meet you. I am honored and delighted to make your acquaintance, my gentleman, said Arines, pushing herself into a seated position against the wall. Okay, so, you're not going to kill me and I'm not going to kill you, right? Stephen asked. Arines felt genuinely offended. I would never harm a gentleman, she said, literally turning her nose up at the notion. Well, my head and nose seem to disagree, said Stephen. The imp never gave inflection in its voice, but she tell from his expression and the tone of Stephen's barks that he was making sport of her. She risked a playful slap at his tummy. Felt oddly firm for a man. He didn't seem to mind, either. And there's this. Deeper than I thought. No wonder I'm still lightheaded. Stephen held up his right arm in front of her. Blood dripped from his elbow, freely landing warm and wet over her thighs. She had cut him deeply, no doubts about that. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm tightly to close the slash wound and tore the remnants of her wool chemise from her chest. It was little more than a broad necklace at that point anyway. Stephen didn't pull away as she bound it. That's? He opened and closed his hands a few times, seeming satisfied. Pretty good. He turned to her and smiled. His mouth opened, as if to say something, but silently gaped instead. She watched his eyes roam over her from her top to her bottom. I didn't notice when we were fighting, but you're naked, he said. Very naked. She glanced down, knowing her eyes couldn't tell her anything she didn't already know. Slowly, almost defiantly, she moved a hand to cover her groin. All this time she hadn't thought about it, but she'd been completely undressed. When they took her, she had awoken with almost all of her clothing gone. A small fortune in leathers and furs. Gone were her jerkin, trousers, and fur coat. She had been left with nothing but her undergarment. After a time, even that had been turned into bandages or simply washed to pieces, the last of which she had just given to this man without a second thought. She was as naked as any of the monsters here. She hadn't really been bothered by her nudity until this very moment. Somehow, the presence of this odd man reminded her that the world hadn't been turned on its head, that civilization still reigned on the Almighty's earth, and she had at no point abrogated her need to comport herself in a proper and dignified manner. On the other hand, she was a tortured prisoner, lucky to be alive and in no position to be concerned with covering her shame when mere survival should be her biggest concern. Shame on him for pointing out something so trivial. "I have nothing to be ashamed of," she replied indignantly. "What's the matter? Have you never seen a woman before?" Well, sorry, I just meant that. Hold on." He unclasped his tunic's long, toothed fastener that ran from the top of its neck to the midsection, and stepping out of it. It looked to be clean, save for the bloody section at the right arm, and made of remarkably fine construction. Underneath, he wore a set on soft-looking long underwear. "My gentleman, you needn't disrobe to your undergarments on my behalf," she hissed, reaching out to stop him. She was in far too feeble a condition to do much more than stall him. Had she been in perfect health, things might have been different. He shoved his tunic into her bosom. It smelled thickly of sweet blood, yes, but also sweat and musk. It was not entire unpleasant, but made her uncomfortably hungry. "Here, take it," said Stephen. He shrugged. "Or don't. But then you'll just distract me." The corners of her mouth began to creep up. She couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. Either way, it made her smile just a bit. She grimaced as she began pulling the garment on, agony racking her entire body with each movement. He took note of the trouble she was having and began to help her. To add to the indignity of losing in single combat to a man, and doing so wearing little more than what the Almighty gave her on the day she had been born, she was having to rely on him to dress her. Using one of her own claws, he cut open the hems at the legs of his garment, the better to fit her larger feet. Sliding it on past her buttocks, he helped her arms inside, fastened it up, and patted her sides softly. "All set," he said. Could have been worse, she supposed. Pretending he was her personal servant made it a little easier, which she noted as she felt the fine fabric decorated with sigils and coats of arms, was definitely not the case. This gentleman was nobody's servant. "Have you a title?" she asked him, admiring one of his sigils. "I thought I heard you mention one." Like yours, Dame Commander?" "Yes. From your inflection when we made introductions, I gathered you are Stephen of House McLaren. I thought Lieutenant Colonel might be a title." "The short answer is no, milady, but how about we talk about this later?" he said quietly. She followed his eyes as he looked from the speaking indentation in the wall and back to her. "I have plenty of questions about this place, and I'm sure you may have some questions for me. Perhaps once we get out of here." She gave a curt nod. Of course the warden was listening. Here the expression was to be taken literally. The walls actually did have ears. "Can you see and hear?" she asked. "None of the others. The monsters can. You looked blind when you first got here, and now you can see the whole from where the warden speaks." "Well, I can't see too well at all," he said. "But when I got here I couldn't see a thing. My eyes needed time to adjust." He leaned close, his body hovering just over hers. "We are getting out of here," he whispered in her ear. "How?" She breathed into his much smaller one. "We wait. We'll figure the rest out," he said. "But I wouldn't worry." A soft sound came from the far wall, like metal on metal. Both her and Stephen turned to the noise. A small hatch, which she knew from experience to be an embrasure, had opened across the room. With all her remaining but not insignificant strength, she lunged for Stephen, grabbing him about the midsection and pulling him to the ground next to her. In one swift motion, she climbed atop him, lying flat, and did her best to cover as much of him as possible. "Don't move!" she hissed in his ear. Moments passes with not a single sound escaping between them or from anywhere else. "Why?" he whispered. She felt his hands move to her sides as if to move her off him, but they remained in place. Confused, she shifted her gaze from side to side, then slowly turned her head to look up and behind them. The hatch had closed. "Sorry, I thought they were going to loose arrows at us," she replied softly. She didn't immediately register that she should probably remove herself from the gentleman. She thought it as much his own fault. He should have said something but didn't, for whatever reason. When she did roll off him, she felt a subtle but distinct loss. After so long with not a single kind interaction or touch from another living soul, it had actually felt nice. Stephen, whom she hadn't thought of as anything but her own countryman since she awoke, had just reminded her of what she'd been doing without. Not only that, but just having him with her in confinement as someone of a similar mind and goals, someone to work with, gave her hope. Though a man, he even made her feel safe and secure. "Don't do that again," he whispered, chagrined, and more than a little hurt. She was about to apologize and explain herself when he continued. "You need to save your strength," he whispered. "You're still hurt from our fight, and I can probably take an arrow better than you anyway." Irini's present condition had little to do with her match with Stephen, from which the pain, breathing issues, and dizziness had largely remitted, and everything to do with her virtually depleted and generally unsatisfactory food supply. She was not recovering her spent energy nearly as fast as she should have been, on top of the fact that she had been terribly weak to begin with. As for who should protect whom, he was still a man, and his arm could attest to the fact that his skin could rebuff arrows no better than hers. She was about to contest both his absurd notions when she noticed something that hadn't been there a moment before. "There is something on the step of that embrasure," she whispered in his ear, nodding in that direction. "The what?" Ree replied softly. "The arrow's lit. With the hatch," she clarified. He followed her gaze, a questioning finger pointing towards the small concave fixture. She nodded. Standing, he appeared nonchalant as he approached the object, palmed it, and returned to her side. Keeping it close between their chests, they examined it together. Roughly as long as the breadth of her hand, the object appeared to be a cylindrical container of some sort. Trying and opening the pressed-on lid, she extracted the contents, an unnaturally smooth piece of white vellum as long as the container and rolled neatly to fit inside. Unfurling it, she could see a set of simple illustrations, like a child's hasty drawings. "I don't get it," Stephen said. "These are stick figures, 2 people. I can tell one is you and the other is me. What are these things?" "Arrows, the kind they use here," Irini's replied. She pointed to the third drawing, where both their figures were struck like game, odd tubular arrows jutting from their backs. "When they hit you, they put you to sleep, except," she examined the fourth drawing, where their figures were on the ground with the arrows sticking in them. Then the fifth, where the arrows had been removed, but the figures were still on the ground. The sixth had 12 hash marks, time, she supposed, and in the seventh and final illustration their figures remained unmoved still. "Except this time they mean to kill us," she finished.